Okay, look, listen, okay, this is important. All of my other videos, right, the politics stuff, the history stuff, the science stuff, the futurism stuff, the mental health awareness stuff, the have peace and love in the world stuff, forget about all of it. Just delete her from your mind, okay? If there is one video that I make that has to have a real world impact, it needs to be this one. I am dead serious about this. I remember being 11 years old and really just getting started into being interested in games and getting my first GameStar magazine and seeing an early screenshot of Spore. And from that day onward, I just wanted to play the fuck out of that game until the rest of eternity. Spore! Jesus Christ, Spore, the greatest invention that the video game market ever saw. Also a huge disappointment, it could have been a lot better than it actually was, and I just 100% blame EA for that. Which is also why, EA, when I say make Spore 2, I am explicitly not talking to you, you gluttonous vampire of quality and joy in games. I am talking to literally anyone else. You know how City Skylines was a spiritual successor to SimCity that was way better than anything the AAA market ever managed to fart out? That's what I want. I don't want a sequel to Spore, I want a spiritual successor. Something that takes the original game, brings it into the modern day, and fixes its flaws. And we do live in an age of not only phenomenal spiritual successors to classic old games, among some not so phenomenal spiritual successors to classic old games, but also just indie games that stand on their own in levels of quality that the AAA market can't even compete with. So it's not a stretch to say that it is possible. But first, maybe for all the younger people in the audience, what even is Spore? Spore is a god game that came out in 2008, created by game design genius Will Wright, who also invented The Sims, and developed by Maxis, which also developed The Sims. Ironically, in this god game, you essentially play the role of evolution. The main game is separated into 5 stages, each with pretty much completely unique gameplay, during which you guide an alien species from the tidal pools to the center of the galaxy. First is the cell stage, which is just very simple in its design and gameplay. Basically, you have to eat, grow bigger, augment your organism with new parts until eventually you enter the creature stage. Now, this Ultra Bang is a little more complex. You're a species that runs around on land, competing in the wilderness for resources so you can increase your intelligence and complexity, altering the species from generation to generation with new parts in the editor. Then you'll enter the tribal phase, which features some light RTS elements. At this point you can befriend, destroy, or buy out other tribes from your same original species that developed. You build a totem pole and advance culturally, though no longer biologically. You don't really get back into the editor anymore until entering the civilization stage. This is where the game just turns full RTS. You have to design buildings and vehicles, all with the powerful editors unlocked at this stage, and conquer your entire planet by various means. So you don't have to go to war, but you could just trade or religiously convert the other civilizations with their different ideologies. Then comes the space phase. Suddenly you have this whole universe at your disposal, this vast galaxy to explore where you can meet countless other species with different ideologies, become allies, enemies, or trading partners, uplift creatures, populate dead planets with life forms of your own creation, and eventually defeat the cyborg menace of the Groks, go to the center of the universe and see yourself reborn as a giant space baby. That wasn't actually Spore, that was the film. But all that wasn't the main selling point of Spore. No, the reason why a lot of people loved the shit out of this game was the editors. Spore came with a toolbox of insanely powerful and easy to use editors for a huge number of different elements. You had the cell editor, the early creature editor, the regular creature editor, the outfit editor for tribes, civilizations, and spacefaring civilizations, the building editor for various different kinds of buildings, the vehicle editor for land, sea, and air vehicles, the spaceship editor, the Anthem editor, and later with the Galactic Adventures expansion, we got the Captain outfitter and the Adventure editor. There were also several editors never released that would have had a massive impact, such as the the Flora editor, the Weather editor, the Galactic editor, the Hut editor, the Terrain editor, all kinds of different stuff that was just cut, and which I totally blame EA for, even if maybe they did have nothing to do with it. Other things that were cut, by the way, were the molecular stage, the aquatic stage, and the city stage, and the terraforming stage, many features of which were incorporated into other stages, so they're not lost completely. All of the Spore editors could be used to create a huge variety of things. They were also simple in approach, but could become increasingly complex. They had just huge amounts of different customizable parts that could be placed anywhere on the body and played around with in pretty much all editors. And content created this way could actually appear in the game. But wait, there's more! There was this thing called the Sporepedia, which catalogued your creations and the creations of other people. You could publish your creations onto the general Sporepedia on the internet, and people could subscribe to you or the so-called Sporecasts, which are like curated collections of stuff. Suddenly, your game is populated with content from various incredibly talented people, and you could even make it so only certain things appeared in the game, so you wouldn't run into any absurd shit all the time, because there was a lot of that, especially in the space phase. Since Spore, I have not seen a single game that even remotely approaches just the quality of the editors of the programs that you had access to develop especially spaceships and alien species, and there are some pretty good things out there on the market today. A lot of people never even played the main campaign. You could just leave that be somewhere else and access all of the editors with all of the stuff unlocked from the very beginning. So they would just build and publish on the Sporepedia and play with each other and send each other their cool stuff and remix other people's creatures. It was phenomenal. This level of sort of user-generated content and the ease with which it could be shared and with which a community could be built out of it was revolutionary for the time, and I have never seen it done since, even though it genuinely created a fantastic community of really creative people who could easily develop and share their work and ideas. There is right now, today, this very hour, right now, someone is doing something in Spore and has uploaded it to the Sporepedia. Spore was far from flawless, obviously. They tried to do a thing that had never been done before and that hasn't been done since. Of course they did mistakes along the way, though to be fair, a lot of those mistakes really boil down to personal taste because many people enjoyed the way they were done and don't consider them to be mistakes at all. For instance, the whole style of the game was not very serious or realistic. It was more focused on the cutesy, cool-looking kind of stuff, the little bit comical, which you could devise really realistic or serious-looking creatures in the creators if you knew how to manage them properly, but that definitely wasn't the design focus, which is unfortunate because judging by early screenshots, that used to be the case. There was a lot of, comedy, over-exaggeration kind of stuff, not taking things very seriously, which is something that just generally bothers me in media. It's a taste thing, but it was basically the 4X variant of The Sims, which, by the way, if anyone is interested in making a realistic Sims game with sort of dark adult themes like mental health and drug addiction, I'd be down. For me personally, the only phase I really cared about at any point was the space phase. Don't get me wrong, the other ones were cool and enjoyable, but they were just obstacles in the way of getting to the real game. And also the space phase had some problems that made it unfun to play sometimes. Like for instance, you weren't just like this alien species that you had to manage, but you were also a spaceship captain that could travel around the galaxy, and you had to, you flew to certain planets and then you create established trade routes, or you just went out exploring. The problem was, if you went out exploring too much and one of your colonies way back home had like a minor problem, you would have to go back there and fix it very quickly. Otherwise, there could be a cascade that would ruin the entire empire, which is a bit of a problem. So full-on exploration was not really encouraged. So if you're going to make a new Spore space phase, focus on the captain aspect, or the 4X aspect, or just allow me to do these things remotely. Also, while I have you here, let me just very quickly unload my wish list of the dream Spore that I want to play on you. Keep in mind, other people probably want very different things, but I am making a video about this subject, and they're not. So really, I feel like I have all the cards in my hand. So listen to me exclusively, and develop the game that I want. Listen, the most important part that you need to get back is the editors and the Sporepedia. Frankly, if you do the editors that are better than Spore, and the Sporepedia that is also better than Spore, that for me is just a game, that I don't need anything else. Just do that, and I will be happy. If you're gonna put in gameplay, which, I mean, really you should do, make it only be the space phase, but integrate other phases into it. Like Spore had me abduct creatures from other planets, or just create new creatures whole cloth to terraform and create new ecosystems on my colonies, so have me do that. That's some elements from the creature phase. Give me deeper politics on larger planets that actually look somewhat realistic, on like the city level, and then you have on individual colonies with maybe different political factions and all that. Some small skirmishes, civil wars, whatever. Add some RTS elements from the civilization phase. Really just more a little bit of like gritty realism, proper trade goods, and like chains of production that also sort of build themselves out of actions of basically the NPCs of the game. Give me some like subspecies and ethnicities. Just alien populations that maybe migrate from another planet to my planet and have different needs because there's a war over there and whatever, but they also give different benefits, and you have social strife there. There's a lot of very good 4X games like Stellaris that do these kinds of things, just sort of steal stuff from them. Speaking of, this is my main point of contention. It doesn't really need to be realistic as much as it needs to be more serious in its style, maybe a more scientific or a more gritty approach, whatever you would like to prefer in the way that you develop this game. Use the new technology that modern game developers have at their disposal to make it so, I mean, you can still do like cutesy and funny creatures the way that it was in Spore. You could also do realistic and serious creatures, but make it so that isn't the default thing anymore unless you're really good at what you're doing. Let me play around more with materials and textures. Give me more fine control over parts. Modding. Maybe integrate a kind of modding like a parts editor into the Sporepedia. Have that be like a real ease of access kind of thing. The drag and drop system of the original editors was, of course, always phenomenal. It will probably still make for a very good backbone if you're interested in doing this kind of thing. However, there was one issue that I always had with the parts that were provided, is that none of them went into the body. Like, I would like to see just like nose holes that I could just put on the face of my alien that are just holes that go into the body, right? Maybe I could, do with the fine tuning so that they flare up or to alter the shape of them, but so that it's just holes, that it's not a nose that is on the body. And that is just an overly specific thing that I always envisioned when I think about Spore. Don't give me weird complexity restrictions, just let me do the thing. You can add some certain like DNA point restrictions in the gameplay part of the thing, but also allow me a creative mode where I can do whatever. Also have a decent collection of parts, and really we do live in a time where this is possible. You can, if you make good, high quality parts collections, also sell them as DLC, but only if they are fairly priced. If you pull some Sims store shit, I will be angry. Something that I've always wanted to see, but for which we probably don't have the technology quite yet, is inspired procedural generation. Like, for instance, in Spore you had to build each individual kind of building and then place them on like a predefined city grid. But what if you could teach the computer a style of buildings and of ways of structuring a city and have it procedurally generate content from that? Right, you could have it take in things from a sample and alter the distribution with sliders and the parameters that are possible. You could extend this to individuals and species, so that basically you could automatically generate different ethnicities, but also if you define parameters, and this will probably be some advanced gameplay stuff, so you should probably have this as a function that it also sort of randomly generates it to a point so you don't have to fine-tune everything as much. But that you could essentially, if we go back to the nose hole example, right? I could tell the algorithm how much larger or smaller it can make these nose holes, and then it would find some point between these different parameters and when it generates individuals. And you could do this with a lot of different features, like for instance the color of the skin or the scales or the whatever you will have, or the feathers, and maybe even in certain regions you could define the colors that it can have, and so you could generate individuals out of that look distinct from each other in the same species, while not having to do all of that manually. Then you could add an evolutionary element to that, where if you have something that's on a colony that doesn't interact with like the main homeworld much, it will deviate more ever so slightly, altering the parameters in maybe random directions. And if it has contact with another species, maybe cultural elements from that species could be integrated into the architectural style, be they colors, be they shapes, be they patterns, whatever. And also, depending on where you are, the subspecies could develop slightly differently, and you could really get some vastly different ethnicities on various colony worlds. I don't think we have this technology yet. I think that we're very close we just need to get a little deeper into generative adversarial networks, and I don't think an indie developer on a limited budget can shoulder this quite yet. Here's a different thing. There is already a lot of very good 4X games out there, and I do very much enjoy the captaining aspect of the Spore thing. That's a cool feature that there isn't as much of in the games market. Which, by the way, just like an option of designing interiors, I wouldn't frown upon it. So what if instead of doing just a 4X game, you do kind of a 4X game, but it's actually all running in the background? And the player doesn't actually run the 4X game. The player is actually a powerful spaceship captain whose actions influence the course of a procedurally generated galaxy. You could become a diplomat, a pirate that hunts down, or you could be a pirate hunter. You could be an industrialist that extracts raw materials from planets and asteroids. You could be a scientist that catalogs different species and tries to find cures for strange diseases, or just sells weird pets of their own genetic creation on a giant pet market. You could have a huge fleet with which you go to war with rival empires for reasons of practicality or ideology. You could probably even with time integrate the thing that Spore Galactic Adventures did into this. Just everything you do has an impact on the galaxy around you, but you're still a powerful individual, not necessarily an empire, and you're probably also not the head of the empire, though you could become the head of the empire, you know? Really, it's similar to the way that the X series of games works. It's not 4X, just X. It's like a space sim, a completely different thing. I think that style of game would breathe a lot of fresh air into this modern games market, and really, frankly, you could just develop a 4X game or an X-style game first, right? Depending on what you want, and then maybe in a big expansion, building on that former thing that was already there and working so the two elements work with each other, you could also develop the other game mode that you hadn't really developed as much before. And so players can play the game in the way that they prefer. And of course, you could charge money for like a really good expansion like that to players that are already invested. And this is all a huge ask. It's completely fantastical. I am aware that probably this is never going to happen, or at least it's not going to happen anytime soon. A project of this size I don't think is something that like a modern indie developer can really do, unless they have an extremely convincing Kickstarter that doesn't result in like a No Man's Sky type hellscape. Because unless CD Projekt Red is gonna do something that is way out of its wheelhouse and thus probably also bad, I don't trust any publisher with this. But who knows? I've always been surprised. There's a lot of very smart people out there, a lot of people who are going to be able to do a lot more things with a small team, depending especially on how the technology will develop over like the coming decade. I could really see this happen eventually. Also, if you are currently working on this, give me a call, you magnificent bastard. Inform me. Give me some hope in this spoiled, forsaken hellhole that is Earth. Thank you very much for watching this massively rambly and just pure wish fulfillment video that's gonna just make people want something that isn't even an announcement. It's just a bunch of ideas, and I can see a lot of you sitting right there like, shit, I need to play this game, but nobody's actually developing this game. So it's not only that I have to wait for this an indeterminate amount of time, but I'll probably have to wait for this forever, and I really want to play it. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things. Share this to your relevant communities. Don't spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon and following me on Twitter, and also maybe buying some of my Beautiful merch. In that spirit, make the game. Jesus Christ, just develop this game. I beg you, please do it. You need to do this. Please. and see you around, cunts.